Hello, and welcome to this week's Ethical Dilemma in Science. We're going to take a look at incentivizing recycling in an effort to close the loop on a circular economy. So, this is a follow-up to an earlier Ethical Dilemma in Science where we were taking a look at the single-use plastic bag bans that are emerging kind of across the world, but going into effect in the United States, especially in the Delaware Valley here in 2022. And so this is a slide that I used in that, basically looking at all of the plastic that is being produced from 1950 to 2015, and then what's happened to it? Where is it all gone? And so we've got a little bit down here, about 2.5 billion tons that is still in use, but a vast majority of it was going to be used once. And that had been used once, a very, very small percentage of that down here has been recycled, and then the recycled still in use is an even smaller portion of that. But then taking a look at the overall kind of outcome, the vast majority of it is going to be discarded kind of over here, going into landfills, potentially, filling up the space there. And, as a risk, the chemicals and the plastics could be leaching out of the landfills and getting out of the groundwater, getting into the groundwater. And then a small portion is also incinerated here, so used and sometimes in case of generation of electricity. So what we can see is that lots and lots of plastic has been produced, lots of advantages to having plastic and using plastic, but a vast majority of it is used once and disposed of. So how do we promote recycling? How do we increase the recycling rate? And so this gave rise to a Seinfeld episode from a long time ago. I just play a very short clip of this. I'll post it in the link below if you're interested in seeing it more.
Don't throw that away.
Well, I'm not paying the 5 cents for that stupid recycling thing.
You don't pay 5 cents, you get 5 cents back. Here, read the label here. Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York. Refund, 5 cents. Yeah. Well, what do you think the hobos are doing?
I don't know. They're deranged.
Listen, can you give me a lift back to my place?
No, I can't. I gotta pick up land. I'm taking it out of this Kennedy auction.
Hey, I'll see you later. What is this MI 10 cents?
Michigan. Michigan, you get 10 cents.
10 cents?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you mean you get 5 cents here and 10 cents there? You could round up bottles here and run them out to Michigan?
That doesn't work.
What do you mean it doesn't work? You get enough bottles together.
Yeah, you overload your inventory and you blow your margins on gasoline. Trust me, it doesn't work. Now, you're not talking that Michigan deposit bottle scam. No, I'm off that.
You tried it?
Oh, yeah, every which way. Couldn't crunch the numbers. It drove me crazy.
And having grown up in Michigan with the 10-cent bottle recycling kind of reward, if you want to think about it like that, this episode was really interesting when I saw it. And then in the world of life imitating fiction, we've got an incident in 2017 of a Flint man from Flint, Michigan, that attempted to bring a U-Haul truck of non-recyclable bottles and go in for that recycling reward that is present there. And so we can see providing incentives, providing rewards for recycling at least draws interest in a comedic realm, as well as, in this case, an individual that has attempted to do that. And so we take a look at recycling. And again, it started out getting into this in the realm of plastic recycling. A couple recent articles, late May 2022, basically saying plastic recycling doesn't work and will never work. And then over here in June 10th, another commentary, despite what you're hearing, plastic recycling works. So two very, very different views on what's possible with recycling and plastic recycling specifically. And then two articles that I took a look at, basically looking at, what are the criteria? What are the ways that you kind of measure the success of a recycling program? Do you look at, simply recycling rate? So how much goes into the recycling cans and avoids going into landfills. And then another way of looking at that is that, are you producing products? In this case, the life cycle metrics. Are you producing products, or at least producing plastics that remain kind of in use for an extended period of time? So get away from that single-use plastic bag that is convenient to carry your groceries out to the car and then into your home. And then pretty much that's it. So it has a useful lifespan, a useful life of about 2, 3, 4 hours, but then extends in the environment for an extended period of time. And so looking at this, and again, interested in waste in general, recycling rates in general, this is the municipal solid waste chart from 1960 over here on the left-hand side, all the way up through 2018. The red line is taking a look at the total amount of municipal solid waste that's generated in millions of tons. And this is, again, within the United States, the University of Michigan Sustainability Office research facility taking a look at that. And then the blue line here is actually the per capita generation. So the amount of municipal solid waste generated per person per day. And so what we can see here is that it's pretty much leveled out between 1995 to 2018 for about 4.5 to 5 pounds of waste generated per person per day. And again, this is a per capita rate, so it's taking a look at the total amount of waste generated in the United States divided by the number of people. And so there are some activities that generate a lot more waste than others. We've got individuals that are trying to conserve, reduce their use of packaging and things like that. But having taken the trash out to the curb earlier, I can believe we're generating a whole lot more waste than hopefully we should be doing, and ideally try to minimize the waste and increase the recycling in some way. So another chart, again from the University of Michigan Sustainability Research Facility, taking a look at where the municipal solid waste went, going again from 1960 up to 2018. And we can see that, roughly 60 years ago now at this point, a vast majority of this was going into the landfill. The landfill is in the gray here, and a very small percentage is in green. Over the last 60 years, we've seen the amount that's gone into the landfill has been reduced. The amount that has been recycled has increased, but we've also seen kind of the development of the light green here. This is combustion of waste, so this is basically burning the waste as a potential fuel source to generate electricity. And then in the blue, the light blue here towards the top, we're looking at diverting kind of organic materials, food materials, potentially wood and things like that into compost. Food waste really shouldn't end up in the landfill. They can be composted and be used to generate fertile soil that can be used kind of over again. In addition to kind of taking a look at kind of where the waste has been going, taking a look, and again, this is still the University of Michigan data, we can see that the recycling rates in 2018 are very good in terms of things like paper, yard waste. This would be like grass clippings, leaves, branches, things like that, that many municipalities will collect, put into basically a huge compost pile, and then let it, basically develop over usually a season. And so they do it over winter. And then by springtime, they're able to have some good, fertile compost that oftentimes they will either sell or make available to their residents. So pretty good recycling rate. The dark green here is recovered. The light green is what is actually discarded, disposed of, going into the landfills. But we can see that for some things, steel and aluminum are much worse than that. Plastics over here are down here kind of less than 10%. And so, potentially a large opportunity to increase the recycling rate and recovery of these materials. And so if we take a look at it, why isn't the recycling rate as high as it could be? And basically comes down to kind of economics and incentives. Is there a benefit perceived in doing the recycling? Is there value in doing that? And so this is a 1993 article taking a look at recycling. In 93, and I'll read this, it says, at present, the cost of collecting and processing recyclable materials far outweighs their value as a commodity that can be sold back to the industry. And so basically saying recycling costs money. And that cost of the recycled materials is a higher price than virgin, new produced from raw materials. And so an example of this is a 2019 article from The Guardian, taking a look at the fact that recycled materials are costing more than new materials. And because of that, there's kind of a little bit of a disincentive to using recycled materials in the production of new products. And because of that, from an economic standpoint, it's just cheaper to, dispose of it and create it anew. To take a look at this, and again, we said paper was, a pretty good rate of recycling. But then this is from the Target website in June 2022. Two types of paper produced by the same company. I think both of these are Up and Up, and so we can see it here, they're both the same company. But one ream of paper, 500 count, 500 sheets of paper, in kind of new paper is $5.29 for 500 sheets. But over here, 100% recycled paper is $8.19. And so you're talking about an increase, roughly from $5 to $8. That's almost a 60% increase in the cost that is passed on to the consumer to use recycled materials. And so, is it worth something, worth enough to spend an extra $3 to somebody to use recycled materials? Or do you go with the cheaper version of materials that are being created from, in essence, virgin wood pulp, virgin paper that hasn't been used before? So it's being produced new in this use here. And so we take a look at this. How is it that we're going to increase the recycling rate? How is it that we're going to, decrease the cost of recycling to make it more economically feasible to recycle materials and to make those materials, those recycled materials, back into products that can be used and extend their life as opposed to going back and using raw materials over and over again. And so there, within the United States and in many other areas of the world, there are two main strategies to kind of residential recycling. I'm going to focus on that because many of us, the majority of our garbage produced is going to be in our homes. And many corporations and companies and office complexes have, different strategies for the recycling rate. But in general, the recycling is either going to be in a single stream recycling program or a multi-stream recycling program. We'll look at each one of these individuals. But at its very basic level, single stream recycling basically means that you don't have to sort it out. You're just going to put all of your recyclable materials into a single container, and somebody else is going to sort that out. And so some advantages in that is that it's a whole lot easier. If you've got something that can be recycled, you don't have to look at, I still look at the plastics to make sure that, it's a number that can be recycled within my area. But you don't have to figure out, okay, this is a type 1 plastic, and this goes in this container, and this is a 5, and that goes in that container, and this goes there, and this goes someplace else. So it's a whole lot easier. And because it's easier, it's more convenient, that increases the recycling rate. People are more likely to do something that is relatively easy to them. It increases awareness because every time you put something that's recyclable into a recycling can, you're actually thinking about it. Whether it's conscious or unconscious, you're kind of building that habit and reinforcing that. And if you've got this single stream, all of the recycled materials go into a single container, it makes the collection easier. We've got a recycling truck that comes down the street, follows the garbage truck, and they basically take the can and dump all of the things in, and you get this mixture of recyclable materials that is in the recycling truck that will then have to be sorted out at some point. And so the cons to this single stream recycling is that it's convenient for the resident, convenient for the consumer, but it then means that it has to be sorted out at the recycling facility. And that becomes a little bit more difficult when you've got this commingled materials that are present, that are all there, and you've got to go through and sort things, and many times by hand. Some locations they're working on robotics, and they're improving the robotics to be able to do that. But you're dealing with a fair level of contamination of materials that aren't cleaned properly, contamination of non-recyclable materials that are present. That if you've got dirt, if you've got food particles, if you've got these non-recyclable materials that gets into that recyclable stream, they have the potential to kind of decrease the value, decrease the kind of quality of the material that could be recycled. And so that's single stream, and we see lots of municipalities that are doing that within the United States. The alternative to that is multi-stream cycling. And so in multi-stream cycling, what you've got is a whole variety of different recycling containers, many cases different colors or labeled differently. And so the consumer, the resident, kind of goes through and does that initial sorting there. This makes the processing at the recycling plant much cheaper and much easier because it's already sorted, and hopefully much less contamination is going into the recycling stream in this process. Because of that, this form of recycling, multi-stream recycling, is much more profitable. The costs to do it are much less. However, there are still some cons associated with it. You've got the public sorting the items into the bins. And so you've got to be conscious, like, okay, I've got a glass bottle. I need to find a glass bin or a bin in which you put glass recyclables in. And you've got to sort it out. That makes it a little bit more challenging. And because of that, it's not as easy. And because of that, we tend to see lower recycling rates being present. Now, there are people that argue that even though it's a lower recycling rate, it's a higher quality of recycling, and so it may balance out. But you've decreased awareness. If somebody's going to say, I don't want to sort this out, I'm just going to dump everything into the waste, you potentially decrease the awareness of the individual and decrease the kind of importance of going through that recycling process. You also have higher costs of collecting. And so our single recycling truck that comes down the road, if we've got, in this case, 4 different streams of recycling, they need to have 4 different containers on that truck, or potentially 4 different trucks that'll come through. And so you're going to have all of the, the orange, which looks like plastics. You've got the yellows, which looks like metals. You've got glasses over here in the green, and then paper products over here in the blue. You don't want to mix those things back up when you put them into the truck or take them to the plant. And so you're going to need them to keep them separate. And in doing so, that's going to increase the costs of collecting and transporting those materials. And as I said, regardless, you've still got this stream of material, and this we've got a recycling plant here, so you've got the materials that are flowing through, and individuals kind of sorting out contamination, sorting out materials that don't need to be included within this waste stream. And so it becomes a much more difficult, much more time-consuming, and much more expensive process. And so if we take a look at this, how are ways in which we can increase the quality of the materials going into recycling? Now, again, recent articles, Newark Post, asking residents to reduce contamination in their recycling bins. Looked like they were going to start issuing fines to people. They backed off on this, but are trying to increase the awareness of the difficulty that incorrect materials in the recycling bins, contaminated materials, really negates the benefits of recycling if it contaminates the material and it can't be used in a recycling manner. Alternatively, California, as well as a lot of smaller municipalities now, are taking a look at composting of organic food waste. Again, this is something that is fairly easily dealt with and really doesn't need to go into the landfill if it's processed in the proper way. It will break down kind of naturally and produce kind of a fertile material that can be used to kind of nourish the soil. Or at least be used to kind of replenish dirt if we take a look at it from that perspective. And so overall, what we can see is that we've got a problem with the recycling. And so multiple attempts by different state legislatures have taken a look at what can be done to kind of improve the recycling rate, to kind of reduce the cost of the recycling. In many cases, the municipalities, the cities have to pay for the recycling out of tax dollars with limited tax income. They may not have the funds to be able to fully support a robust recycling program. And so what we're seeing proposed in New York, but then two states, and I don't have it in my notes which states, but two states in 2021, I should have written that down, I'll put it in the notes down below, are moving towards what's referred to as extended producer responsibility. And so this is mainly for plastic packaging now at this point, but the goal is to reduce plastic usage, to incentivize the use of recycled plastic, as well as to provide funds for new recycling technology. So basically what they do is shift the costs of the recycling from the consumer, the resident, the city, the municipality that may be doing it, into the producer. And so the producer will be sponsoring recycling programs, and in doing so, oftentimes will be more likely to kind of reduce the material used in the packaging. You buy groceries, and you look at the plastic containers, and there's elaborate kind of packaged materials to keep your produce safe. But it's a huge waste to keep all of your little apples in individual little spots within a box. So potentially, if we can improve the recycling rate, use of recycled plastics in another way, or reduce the amount of packaging being present, we are going to reduce the amount of materials that are going into the landfills. Now, this is similar to programs that are found in the European Union, several Canadian provinces, as well as throughout Australia, Africa, and South America. Now, the opponents to this argue that you're simply charging the company, and that company then is just going to pass on the costs to the consumer anyway. But potentially this is a method that is going to allow for a reduction in the production of plastics, and in doing so, kind of reduce the amount of plastics that are being used and being shunted into the landfills. Take a look at this again. Prices being present, lots of advantages to recycling, but until the economics are worked out, in this case June 2022, so basically this week when I pulled this article, Plastic News for the plastic manufacturing industry is basically saying that people that have been using one form of recycled plastic are switching from using the recycled to using virgin plastic because of the price. It's not economically feasible to use the recycled materials. It's much cheaper to create it new. And so recycling programs have the potential to work, but there are still problems with them. There are still kind of gaps in many cases in the economics for that. And so if there are ways in which we can improve the efficiency, improve the quality, and improve the use of these recycled materials, we could potentially improve the situation, reduce the amount going into landfills, reduce the amount of raw materials being used to produce these plastics, and kind of eliminate the kind of long-term effects of these products being produced. And so, I said, we wanted to close the loop on a circular economy. So in many cases, what we're looking at right now, especially in the United States, can be thought about as a linear economy. You get these raw materials together, you produce something, you use it, and then you dispose of it. And so we've got this ever-growing kind of landfill problem that's going to be occurring. The alternative to that is a circular economy. In a circular economy, you're going to produce the materials once from raw materials. You're going to use it for a period of time, and then you're going to recycle it. And as opposed to having to go back into raw materials, you would be able to take the materials that have already been used and put into kind of the market flow, and then reuse them in some way. But again, that's dependent upon having a high quality of recyclables without a whole lot of contamination being present. So this gives rise to the ethical dilemma in science this week. So we know recycling reduces the environmental cost of human activity. If we recycle, we can conserve raw materials and resources by reducing the new production of items. We can reduce the flow of waste materials into landfills, and the problem associated with the landfills, many times these chemicals are leaching out of the landfills and getting into the surrounding areas, getting into the water supply. Ideally, we want to be able to promote the use of ingredients through a purified reclamation of the materials, so reduce the contamination so that these materials that are recycled truly can be reused in a quality product. In doing so, prevent pollution, so waste that gets into the environment as well as waste that gets out through the degradation of these things. And the recycling, if it's done properly, can create jobs and economic benefits. So the Environmental Protection Agency in 2020 announced a national recycling goal with a goal of recycling rate of 50% by 2030. We're below that now at this point, but it's possible and feasible that we could reach that. If we take a look in 2019, the European Union as a whole had a recycling rate of 48%, with countries such as Germany, Slovenia, Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, Denmark, Italy, and others were well over the 50% rate. And so, it's an admirable goal. It's a goal that we should be able to reach. But what could be done or what should be done to increase recycling in order to reach this goal, as measured by reducing contamination in recycling? So improve the quality of materials that are going into the recycling rate. Less materials that are contaminated, less materials that are dirty, less materials that are kind of misallocated into the recycling stream. Making the recycling process more efficient. Maybe this is technology, maybe it's robotics, maybe it's something else. But making it more efficient is going to reduce the contamination in the process and improve the quality of the recycled materials at the end. And then finally, the part that we're seeing struggling with right now is strengthen the economic market for recycled materials. And so make it economically beneficial to use recyclable materials. So it's not cheaper to just dispose of it and create it anew from the beginning from raw materials. And so what are some things that could be done to incentivize quality recycling and the use of recycling materials? As always, I'll post a number of references that I used in preparing this ethical dilemma in the notes below. And as always, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you and have a great week.